Alright guys, this is episode 5 of the Crown Vic to a trophy truck build. If you haven't seen episodes 1 through 4, check out the link in the description below. Otherwise, the only thing I've got to talk about is the budget. I had $137 going into this, but I sold the factory tires and wheels off of the Crown Vic for $200. So I've got $337 left on this very tight budget. Other than that, let's just jump right in. So this is where we left off a few weeks ago. As you can see, it's starting to look pretty close. I mean, it's getting there. The body's finally mounted, and I've got it set up about where it's going to be at the ride height. So in order to weld everything on the roll cage, obviously I have to remove as much as I can. So here I'm just removing all of the fiberglass, the spare tire, the seats, all that kind of stuff. And then comes the process of welding, and this is going to take a while. There's a lot to weld on this sucker. All the welding is done on the buggy, at least on the main roll cage here, and now I'm getting ready to skin the roof. So I've got it marked up where I need to slice it, and then once it's sliced, I will probably put some bead rolls in the sides and then get the sucker mounted. So let's get cutting. So this is how the roof is looking so far. I did a couple bead rolls on the side to kind of strengthen it up a little and make it look snazzy. I think it's coming along so far so good. Now on the front, I'm actually going to do it in 3 pieces because there's quite a bit of a curve to it down here, and it's going to be a lot easier, especially with one person, to just do it in 3 sections, and then that way I can do a little bit more ribbing on it, because in the center back here I am going to have to weld it to this piece because it's still a little bit soft on the edges. Obviously with the ribbing it's much stiffer, but so I'm going to do that now. I've got the first piece ready to go. Here's the little triangle I cut out, and then I marked up where I wanted to do the bead roll, and now I'll do that. So here's the roof. I think it came out pretty good. Let me show you what I did for the B-pillars. So here's the B-pillars. Real simple. I just did a couple bead rolls in it. I think it's looking pretty good. Alright, here's how the front A-pillar covers are looking. I think they came out pretty sharp, or at least this side did. I want to show you how I made this piece though. It's pretty straightforward, but I've got the template over here for the passenger side. And I get to use my cool guy new shear. So here is the steering wheel, pretty close to where I want it. I've got it set up with bungee cords and some wire ties. It's not a bad position. It's a little close to everything. I obviously don't have a lot of room on this build. You can see how close it ends up to the engine here, and then to the window here. It's very close. It's going to be a tight fit. I'll probably end up putting a slightly smaller steering wheel on it. I'm not sure. This one's 15 inches. I was thinking of maybe going 13 inches. It's got power steering, so that shouldn't be an issue. But I'm going to go ahead and make up a bracket for it now, and then get this sucker welded up. And then after that is going to be the brakes. Oh boy, the brakes. This is going to be a doozy. So I'll show you how I end up making the brakes fit. Obviously, I can't fit the power booster right here where it needs to be. So we're going to get a little creative, but nothing I haven't done before. Just time consuming. So let's get the steering figured out first, and then the brakes. So I've got a couple pieces of steel cut here for it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill the holes that I need, and then I am going to sleeve it because it's not super thick, and then I'm going to do little supports here for it, and then I'll probably end up welding the nuts on the top here, then that way I can just put the bolts in from the bottom, and then I should be good to go. Alright, let me catch you up to speed on the steering column. I've got it mounted up. Right now it's only being held in by this one support, and this is what the support looks like. It's just a welding tab for it, and so I just needed to get a little support on there. I do have all the nuts welded on, and then I've got the spacers in there because it's thin wall tubing. Now, for the supports on the front part here and here, what I was going to use is I was going to just use one of these tabs, and you can see how it's a little bit offset. So it fits pretty close in there. But I'm kind of wasting this tab. I should just make a little support. So I took some 1/8 inch steel, and then I've got it marked up, and so I just need to cut this little groove into it so that I can weld on these supports here and then right here for the steering. But I've got to cut this little crescent shape out of it. And I've got a few choices. I could use my bandsaw over here, but I've got the large blade on it right now, so it's not really set up for it, and it's a little bit too thick for that one. So the other thing I could use is I could use my grinder here, and I could just do a little V-notch into it, you know, a V-notch here and then I could file away, or I could sand it with like a flapper disc or something like that, or I could use a Dremel, and I could use that little head to kind of just cut it all away. But all of those options are pretty terrible. This is one of the most annoying problems that I would run into is cutting odd shapes out of larger pieces of steel when you just don't have, you don't have a ton of equipment for it. So let me show you my little trick that I do with this. So the first way I do it here is to use the wood to guide the hole saw, and then I just clamp a piece of metal onto it. And this works pretty good, but it does tend to kick the metal a little bit. So the way I prefer to do it, you drill through the wood all the way, and then you can clamp the metal piece to the underside. And it works pretty good. Just make sure you clamp it hard so that metal doesn't move when it's drilling. And check out how they came out. I think they're fantastic. Look at that gap. These are going to be awesome, so I'll weld those up, and then I'll be good to go. Alright, so the steering is looking good, and I've got my brake pedal set up pretty much where I want it. And I've got my power booster pretty much where I want it, but as you can see, they're 90 degrees apart. And that's pretty much the only place I could fit that power booster. And let me show you what I would normally use in this situation. This is what I would normally use. I've used this before. It's a 90-degree pedal relocation bracket, but because of my ridiculous self-imposed budget, I don't have $149 to spend on it. So I'm going to have to modify the Crown Vic parts to make it work on my own. Now the good news about making the bracket myself is that I can get all of the angles exactly how I want it, and I think I'm going to have the pedal mount actually in about 5 degrees or so, and then that way the pedal throw is exactly where I want it. And then I'll make the brackets a little bit longer so that I can actually integrate it into the roll cage to make it stronger. So it'll end up being a better product. It's just kind of annoying to have to build. But let's just get started. So here I start off just by marking up where all the holes are going to be. Now the center hole, if you notice, it's a little bit off to the side, and so that's why I used the T-square just to make sure that I got it all lined up. And then I did a couple little hole punches. Now here I'm just doing the pilot holes for it, and when I do these pilot holes, I try to use a drill bit that's not a common size, something like a 5/32 or a 15/64, because those drill bits don't seem to get used as much. So they're good to use for pilot holes. That way you're not wearing out your 3/8 or 5/16, or in this case the 1/2 inch that I use all the time. So once I get these outside holes all done, I install the hole saw. And what I'm using is just a junk piece of wood underneath. And you can see the 2x4 had a little bit too much flex to it. I wasn't happy with it. So I swapped it out for a junky piece of wood that's from a cabinet top that was perfectly flat. Now I start off drilling at the normal speed, and I just did not like, it seemed like it was going a little bit too fast for the hole saw. So here I am changing out the speed on my drill press. It was at 870 RPM, and I slowed it down to 600 for the hole saw, and I seem to like that a lot better. And then I'm using a little bit of lubricating oil here just to preserve that bit. All right, I've got both brackets made and installed on the pedal. And then on the power booster, I've got them tack welded in just for now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take this plate, I'm going to tack weld this to both of them, and you see how close it is to the roll bar. So hopefully I'll be able to just put like a C-clamp on this and get the pedal exactly where I want it. And once the pedal is exactly where I want it, then I can pull the whole assembly off, and I can start the process of building the bracket that's going to pivot here and connect the pedal to the power booster. Alright, I've got the top plate in, and then what I did is I welded in this little T, and I haven't welded the top here. That way when I unclamp these, I can just pull the whole thing out. So here's what I'm thinking. I've got a grade 8 bolt that I'll probably drill a hole in this plate and then slide through, and then I've got a sleeve here that slides on it that'll pivot, and then I'll build a little triangle shaped bracket here, and what that will do is it'll transfer force from here to here whenever I hit the pedal. So here's a 3/16 inch steel plate that I've got marked up. I'm going to cut out this triangle here, and I'm going to elongate this hole to a 3/4 so it'll slide over the sleeve so I can weld it on both sides. And then basically it's just going to pivot right here, so when I hit the brakes it'll rotate like this. And then I'll have to make an attachment here to mount to this, and then here to mount to the pedal. So this is how it's looking right now. I welded on this tab so that I've got a support for the bolt that's going to go through there, and then I've got this tacked up, a little bracket here, so I'm going to have to drill this hole in a minute and then put in the bolt that I've got for this. For that I was able to find, just in like my bucket of bolts, I had this, and this is the plastic sleeve that rides on the pedal assembly, and boy, it fit this perfectly. So I'll use this bolt on the power booster, and then this is from an old power booster. And so I'm going to use this to attach to the pedal assembly. And then I had a bucket of Heim joint parts. So I found this Heim joint, and then I've got a metal rod that this can slide into here. And then I've got the sleeve on the power booster here. So with this sleeve, it's like a perfect fit to weld that up, and then just some bolts. I got the long bolt for the, it's going to go through like this. So just working one step at a time, slowly but surely. So here I am measuring up the size of the spacer that I'm going to need that's going to float underneath that little triangle piece here. So I'm just marking that up. So now I've got the spacer and the triangle piece. It's exactly where I want it. So I'm just marking up where I want that hole to be drilled for the power booster bolt. This power booster bolt that I'm using here, this is actually from a seatbelt mechanism. It just so happened to be exactly the right size, which is cool. So I cut off the head of the bolt. That way I can slide it through, and then I'll weld it from the underside. And that's just because this bolt was just way too long. It did get a little bit annoying having to keep taking off that little triangle piece over and over, but that's kind of the nature when you're doing something custom like this, you know, especially something that's technical. You're just going to have to keep doing it over and over. And as you'll see, I'm about to make a mistake here, but those of you who watch my channel will not be surprised by that. That's what comes along with building custom things. So what was cool is I was able to find it's a 7/16 by 20, so it's a fine thread bolt for that. And I was able to find one of those all metal locking nuts, which is nice. So we won't have any issues with vibration. What I'm doing here, I slid all those bolts through the holes, of course, and I'm mounting up the pedal assembly. And what I'm doing is I'm going to weld the backside of these bolts here so that I can just slide the pedal assembly on and not have to worry about getting an open-ended wrench behind it when it's actually on the vehicle. And when I was getting the bolts, I got them at a local Ace, and they're a fine thread metric. I think they're M10 by 1.25. And 3 of them were correct, and one of them I grabbed was actually a finer thread, so it didn't fit. So you see I had to swap that one bolt back. But now the bolts are all welded on, and I'm just going over the pedal assembly location. What's funny here, you can see I'm measuring and measuring and measuring, and I still mess it up. But again, that just comes with the territory of building something like this custom. There's bound to be little roadblocks along the way. So what I'm doing right here is I'm trying to make that rod with the heim joint that attaches to the pedal just exactly the right size so that the pedal is as depressed as possible while still having enough travel to obviously operate the brakes. So I'm just cutting that little factory bracket so that I can slide it into that, that little tube that I have and then weld that to the heim joint as one little piece. So I'm unscrewing the heim joint about halfway. That way I have adjustability. I can make the pedal go out farther, or I can make it go in farther. And this is really where I mess up, because after all that measuring with the pedal partly depressed, I end up measuring it here with the pedal most of the way out. And so it ended up with that rod a little bit too long. And so I think, oh, no problem here. I'll just move the mounting location a little bit on that triangle, which ended up being the mistake. What I should have done was I should have shortened that rod again so that I could use the triangle, because as the triangle moves, it actually deflects the rod a little bit inward. But I haven't figured that out yet, so I'm still just trying to get all the measurements just right. This is part of the downside on working on these things late at night. I think it was about 10 p.m. and I probably should have called it for the evening, especially before I decided to cut that triangle piece that I worked so hard on. So you'll see here, I'm thinking about it. Do I really want to cut it? Do I really want to cut it? And I cut it, and then I weld it. And so when this assembly goes back together, the issue that you'll see when I depress the pedal, that rod that I built actually pops off just because it deflects a little bit too much to the side. And that was just something I wasn't really thinking on. But the All-Star bracket assembly that I've used before, it comes with heim joints on both sides. So that little amount of flex is picked up by the second heim joint. In this case, I'm using the factory rod. But it's all good. I'll get it figured out. All right, so I messed this up pretty good. This bolt here is supposed to be much farther to the outside. So when it's, let me show you. When it's on here, the pedal is moving way too far to the inside. I've got it marked out here. So this is, if I move it to the outside, it'll go from here to here, and where it is now, it goes from here to here. And so the little bracket keeps popping off. So I'm going to have to cut these little welds and pop this piece out. And then it's going to be close to the edge, and so to add a little bit of support, I've got these little 90-degree gussets, and they happen to be 3/8 already. So I'll probably do one on each side here to reinforce it, and then send that bolt back through and weld the whole thing back up. So better get started. All right, this is how it's looking now. Let me show you the pedal when it moves here. So I have a 2006 Crown Vic in the backyard. I went and fired it up to see how much this pedal actually moves during normal braking, and it moves about 1 inch, which translates to about 2 inches of actual pedal movement. So the pedal moves 2 inches, it ends up moving this rod about 1 inch. And so in this case, to get that 1 inch of travel, it goes from about here, about here. So there's a little bit of movement in this rod, but I think it'll be just fine, and it's definitely strong enough. So I'll throw it on the buggy for now. If the pedal doesn't end up sitting in the right position, I might need to shorten this, and worst case, I'll have to make a new one of these where I can move this bolt here just a little bit farther forward, and that'll give it a little bit less deflection as the pedal moves. But I think we'll be good to go. So for the high pressure line for the steering, it actually reached from the power steering pump up to the rack and pinion, but you can see it was a little convoluted. It had the extra hose and it had the line that was bent in multiple weird ways. So what I decided to do was cut out the section that I didn't need, and then I'm using two different brake lines. I got a short 3/8 line that I cut the fittings off of, and then I got a longer one for the center section here. So I just cut off the line that I don't need, file down the inside, and then I'm hooking up my flaring tool with the fitting. And I end up pulling the power steering pump off the vehicle just so it's a little easier to get to that fitting. And then here I cut off that front section, and then I can pull off this fitting as well. So I flared those with the fittings on them. As you can see here, now it's got that cool guy fitting. And then I put the power steering pump and the line back on. I did keep that one section of rubber hose so that it can flex as the engine moves. And then I just used the 3/8 brake line here. I put the union on one side and then one little bend in the middle, and then I measure where it needs to be cut. And then easy peasy, just cut that fitting off, reflare it, remembering to put the fitting on before I flare it. I've made that mistake more than a couple times. So here's the rear coilover mount that I had. It was just temporary, just to make sure I got it in the right spot. What I was thinking about doing was building a little bracket here that connected this tab to this bar, just to make it stronger. But what I ended up doing is I ended up taking one of the 4-inch plates, and then I cut it into a triangle, and then I just mounted it this way. These marks here, this shows the coilover to make sure that I have enough room, and then this is the 90-degree elbow for the reservoir. And so that's how it's going to be set up now. I just have to finish welding it, but it's obviously much stronger like this than it is like this. So now is the time to address the skid plate, and that's because you can see the transmission pan and the oil pan hang a little bit low. And I had thought about changing out that transmission pan for one of the older 4R70W transmission pans that doesn't have that lower pickup tube, but I would like that pickup to be that low for two reasons. One, because it's going to be off-roading and sloshing around, and I want to make sure that obviously the transmission never runs dry. And the other reason is because I'm going to be adding a temperature sensor to keep an eye on the transmission temperatures, and that lower area is the perfect spot to put that sensor here. So what I'm doing is I'm welding some tubes that I actually, it was tubes that I had earlier when I was building the roll cage that I bent in the wrong spot. And so luckily they already had a nice 90-degree bend that I could cut off. But I'm welding those tubes between the front crossmember and the rear crossmember. And that way the entire engine and transmission unit can be dropped from underneath the vehicle just as one. So it's just 2 bolts in the front, and it's going to be 4 bolts in the rear. And then you just drop the engine transmission out, raise the vehicle around it on the lift, and then roll it away so I can work on it. So here I'm just squaring up everything, making sure it's as straight as possible so that I can get that skid plate mounted up. And this skid plate was left over from the pizza truck project. It is 3/16 inch thick, so it's a hefty sheet of steel here. And I'm drilling 6 holes. I wanted to make it where it bolted up to it rather than welded to it. That way I can remove it to service the transmission or engine fluids. So I'm just using a 5/16 inch drill bit here, and then I'm going to pull the skid plate off, and I'm going to enlarge those holes with a step-up bit, and then I'm going to add some rivet nuts. And I like those rivet nuts. Usually it works out really well, but as you'll see on the first one that I install, I actually break the head of the rivet nut tool. And I tried to drill it out, but of course it's hardened steel, so it did not want to come out. So I decided to weld up a old drill bit to it and then try to pop it off that way. And the drill bit broke, but it left enough up there so that after I Dremel a little bit here, I can actually unscrew it. And I thought about grinding that head and installing a different rivet nut, but I didn't want that little piece of metal to be floating around in the tube, rattling around while I'm driving. So I decided that I would just install slightly different size rivet nuts in the other 6 spots. But other than that little mishap, it went really well. All right, I've got the front fiberglass mostly repaired. I've got a seam down the middle, and then I had to do one spot repair there. In the front section, this used to have a grill that was a 2-piece, and the grill had Zeus fasteners on the ends so that it could be popped off. And I think I can get away with mounting it all together. So I'm going to chop this piece in the middle and then put the grill right in here, and then I'll just fill in with fiberglass these edges and just make this all one piece. It's a little hard to tell, but this piece looks like it was bowed in a little bit, and so I think if I can kind of bow it out and use this metal support on the inside, I think it'll end up looking a little bit cleaner, a little bit straighter. So that's what I'm gonna do. That's the next step. I'll go ahead and do that right now. All right, here's how it's looking right now. The grill's on, all the seams are fiberglassed up. There's still some little imperfections you can see, some little pinholes, stuff like that. I'm not going for perfection here. I just don't have the time to make this too nice. So what I've decided is I'm just going to go ahead and do the primer right now, and then I'll address some of the little areas that need touching up after that. Areas like this. That way I can get it all uniform with one color and then figure out where the little spots are and then just touch those up as I go. Otherwise it's just going to take too long. So the primer that I'm using, it's a high build polyester primer. It's the Evercoat Feather Fill. I've had really good luck with it, especially on fiberglass. So I'm going to get this body taken off of the frame, and then I'll get the paint booth inflated, and then I'll get some primer on this thing. It'll be interesting to see it all one color. Well, here it is one color. I think it looks pretty good. You can really see some of the imperfections here. Some of the pinholes, stuff like that. Nothing too bad. Overall, I think it looks pretty sharp. It's just going to need a little bit of work. I'm just going to use some lightweight body filler to fill in some of the imperfections, and then it will be ready for paint. Alright guys, I got some goodies in the mail. To start off, I got some springs. I ordered up 8 of them, different sizes and different spring ratings, because they were having a big sale. They were only $24 a piece. So I'm only going to need 4 of them. So I'm only going to put $96 towards the budget, but I'll have some extras in case I need to soften it or stiffen it up. Next, I've got a mechanical oil pressure gauge. I'm going to swap out the nylon tubing for copper like I did on the forklift, but I've had bad luck with the electronic sending units, so I use these now. Next is a Hobbs meter, just because I'm not going to be using an odometer. Oh yeah, this was $16, I believe, and then this was $12. Next are some side view mirrors. These were for like a golf cart. They were only 16 bucks. Got those. And then this is 2 USB ports, and that's because I'll be using my phone as the speedometer, so I need to keep it charged, and it's also a voltage meter. That was $12 as well. I got some lights for the rear. These were 12 bucks. I got a new bushing. This was $3, and this is because now I need 2 of these, because I have one that's required for the pedal assembly and one that's required for the power booster. Next is an oil pan gasket. This was 20 bucks. I used the modern Felpro one. I've had really good luck with it. This is for the oil filter adapter. Every Crown Vic I have ever had has leaked out of here. And sometimes it looks like it's the oil pan, sometimes it looks like it's the oil filter, sometimes it looks like it's the oil pressure sending unit. Every single time it's been this. And so the coolant runs through this passage, and then you've got oil that runs through these, and then just somewhere in this area, they always end up leaking oil. So that was only $6. I've got a few more goodies coming in the mail this week, but that's what I've got for right now. All right, guys, that's it for episode 5. Thanks for watching. I was going to do this in 6 episodes, but I'm finding out that was a little bit optimistic. There's a little bit too much to do in one last episode. I wanted to have it basically ready to go into paint, and I still have some interior work, fuel system, and the cooling system before I'm even ready to really think about the paint. So it's going to be more than 6 episodes, but I get to kind of make the rules on this, I guess, because I don't have a boss. So that's cool. So I'm going to do probably 8 episodes, and then I'll take it out in the desert, and that will be when we really start to have some fun with this. So I missed a video last week. I was a little bit under the weather, so I couldn't get it done, but I aim to have one once a week from here on out. Next week, I've got a cool little project, and then the week after that will more than likely be the Grumman that I'm building that wall for. That'll be pretty cool, and then the week after that, I'm expecting to have episode 6 ready to go for this. If you want to keep up on my Instagram, I'm AC the Car Guy there, and I do post pictures occasionally of maybe some bits that you won't see here, or if you just want to see what I'm literally working on like at the moment, you can check me out there. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Tell your friends, please subscribe if you haven't already. This channel's starting to gain some momentum, so that's really exciting for me. So we'll see how far we can take this thing. Thank you.